Okay. Hello everyone. So this is I guess, interactive-ish workshop that I will be doing on anarcho-syndicalism, the theory of anarcho-syndicalism. Um, so yeah, and the I'm putting this together at the request of someone from the Anarcho-syndicalist Collective for Education and Diffusion, which is a collection of anarchists from different parts of Quebec, which is in Canada. So that person asked me to read this little introduction to the workshop. So that's what I'm going to do now. So he says thanks to Piper for accepting to do the talk this evening for anarcho-syndicalism. This event has been proposed to Piper, me, by the Anarcho-syndicalist Collective for Education and Diffusion in Montreal, Canada. The Anarcho-syndicalist Collective for Education and Diffusion, ASCED, is made up of anarchist militants from different parts of Quebec province, Canada. We are a French-English bilingual collective with no organizational affiliation. The Anarcho-syndicalist Collective for Education and Diffusion wishes to propagate the ideas and practice of anarcho-syndicalism as widely as possible in the spirit of popular education. Currently, our efforts have been focused on translating, researching, writing, and distributing written material, organizing conferences, etc. If you are interested in those ideas, we encourage you to subscribe to our blog from your own autonomous anarcho-syndicalist groups, or to get in touch with us so that we can collectively create a change in the practice and revolutionary theories of our class. So that's the introduction from the ASED person that I am doing this at the request of, and I thank him for helping me do this as well. So yeah. Also, I hope nobody's hearing any background noise. I'm sorry if some does come through, but not much I can do about it, I don't think. But anyway, so now throughout this stream, if you have questions, you can type the questions in the chat, and I'll see them, and I'll stop, and I'll answer them. But basically, what this is going to be doing is, or basically what this is going to be is, this is going to be a explanation, or an explanation, of anarcho-syndicalist theory, the ideas of anarcho-syndicalism, historically and currently. So yeah. So I'll just start. Well, actually, before I start, I do want to also promote Workers' Solidarity Alliance. I'm a part of Workers' Solidarity Alliance. And I'll put relevant links in the description of this stream. But Workers' Solidarity Alliance is an anarcho-syndicalist group in the United States. It's part of the Anarcho-syndicalist IWA, which is an international that has sections and affiliated groups around the world. And so, yeah, this is partly what I'm going to be doing here is kind of a modified thing that I already did with WSA. So anyway, I will get into it now with all the introductory stuff out of the way. So yeah, like I said, again, if you have questions, type them in chat, and I'll stop and I'll answer them. So to understand the theory of anarcho-syndicalism, one needs to understand anarchism. So I'm going to give a brief summary of what anarchism is. So Anarchism is the section of the socialist movement that sees a socialist society as only coming about through the destruction of hierarchical social structures, essentially. So that's anarchism. And the reason that we have to understand anarchism to understand anarcho-syndicalism is that anarcho-syndicalism is a strategy that was developed by anarchists in order to carry out the class struggle that was to transform or is to transform society. This person in chat says, isn't an and sind irrelevant? I don't think it's relevant. I wouldn't be doing this if I thought it was irrelevant. Anarchism isn't inherently connected to socialism. Yes, it is. Just go read histories of anarchism. I don't know what to tell you on that front. But anyway, so moving on. So now that we have a general summary definition of anarchism, we can get on to the main topic, which is anarcho-syndicalism. Anarcho-syndicalism, as I just alluded to, is a strategy created or synthesized by anarchists. There was syndicalism apart from anarcho-syndicalism. There were even some forms of Marxist syndicalism. But anarcho-syndicalism was created as a strategy for anarchists to carry out class struggle against capitalism. The point of it was to build a libertarian socialist. Libertarian socialism basically just means anarchism. An anarchist, libertarian socialist workers' movement that could transform society away from capitalism and towards socialism. I will also give a summary definition of socialism while we are talking about socialism. So socialism is the envisioned alternative to capitalist society. It's a post-capitalist society that has been theorized by different thinkers and movements, and such a society would be one organized through the free association of people doing labor, and that free association would facilitate production for social use instead of like under capitalism where you have production of commodities that are supposed to bring profits. So that's socialism. So anyway, back on the main topic, anarcho-syndicalism is a strategy for achieving socialism, and that strategy is the organization of labor unions to carry out class struggle. And these labor unions, under the anarcho-syndicalist theory and practice, the anarcho-syndicalist conception, would be organized by the rank and file, so you wouldn't have official positions where a bureaucracy would have more authority than the regular members of the union. The union would be organized by the worker membership, the rank and file itself. And the goal of these unions is ultimately the overthrow of capitalism and the creation of the libertarian socialism we were just talking about. I'll address some questions now because I got some questions in the chat. What's what's the difference between it and anarcho-communism? Anarcho-communism is a proposal for how an anarchist society would be organized. It's a proposal for the kind of anarchist society that anarchists thought should exist after capitalism. Anarcho-syndicalism, as I've been saying, is a revolutionary strategy. So for many anarcho-syndicalists, anarcho-communism was the goal, was the society that they wanted, and anarcho-syndicalism was the strategy for achieving it. That's actually my view. Some anarcho-syndicalists I work with, however, don't necessarily advocate for libertarian or anarchist communism. Is there such a thing as monarchist socialism? I hope not. Like a limited state made only to protect population and allow workers to own the means of production. There was something similar to that, but it wasn't monarchist. It was actually Republican. It was like the thing I'm referring to is a specific split off of the social revolutionaries in the Russian Revolution. And they kind of advocated that, but anarchists don't advocate that because anarchists are against taking state power. Yeah, so anyway, moving on. Yeah, so we've got the general definitions of anarchism and anarcho-syndicalism. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of anarcho-syndicalism. Hold on for a second. Anyway, okay, so now that we have the general definitions of anarchism and anarcho-syndicalism, we can go on to a little bit of the history. There is a Russian historian who is an anarcho-syndicalist. His name is Vadim Demir, and he wrote a book about anarcho-syndicalism, and he says that the roots of anarcho-syndicalism can ultimately be traced back to the first International Working Men's Association. That was a international organization of socialists and workers. Marx and Bakunin were present in it. I did a video in part about it a while ago on the channel. But so Vadim Demir traces it back to the First International. And essentially what's born in the First International is what he calls revolutionary syndicalism, which is essentially the kind of idea of workers forming these revolutionary unions to overthrow capitalism and have the workers take control of society. And revolutionary syndicalism develops more in the late 19th century to early 20th century. And then up into the Second World War, past the First World War, past the Russian Revolution. And then there's kind of, and in that general time frame is where revolutionary syndicalism starts being synthesized by anarchists into anarcho-syndicalism. Some early revolutionary syndicalist unions that would be the basis for anarcho-syndicalism in the future were the USI and Italy, which organized on kind of an anarchist federalist basis, meaning you had rank and file members assembling and then electing delegates who are mandated to carry out the decisions of the rank and file. And the CGT in France. The CGT in France is perhaps the most important early revolutionary syndicalist organization. It was this very militant union in France that was based on workers building kind of class struggle in kind of as kind of an alternative to the social democratic movements that had dominated Europe at the time. Social democracy was Marxism of the 19th century, and you had a lot of these social democratic parties running in elections, having these largely reformist politics. And the CGT was kind of a radical alternative to that, where workers were organizing against the state and for themselves. And it was this kind of revolutionary alternative to the reformist social democratic movement of the time. Unfortunately, the CGT kind of became co-opted by reformists. It wasn't an explicitly anarchist organization. You had anarchists who were part of the CGT, such as Emile Pouget. And he was a formative theorist of anarcho-syndicalism. But unfortunately, there were also a lot of reformists in the organization. And as World War I kicked off and the CGT tried to organize against the war, and the state brought down its force on the CGT and repressed them, the reformists kind of took hold of the organization, and it kind of petered out in terms of its relevancy. So another important development in revolutionary syndicalism and anarcho-syndicalism around that time was in the same country, no less France, was the Bourse de Travail. These were kind of workers' cultural societies. And they did a lot more than just organize workers. They also did support for the unemployed. They also had various cultural programs. So these were like these really holistic working class organizations, and they posed this very militant kind of threat to the French state at the time. And so they really kind of serve as a very early model for the kind of militant rank and file working class movement that the anarcho-syndicalists wanted to build. So if we go ahead a little bit to the end of World War I, and after World War I, where the Comintern is being set up, the Comintern being the international of communist parties that was essentially controlled by the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks went about trying to set up a union international that was connected to the Comintern. So they were going to have the Comintern, which was the international organization of the communist parties, and then they were going to have the international organization of the unions that were sympathetic to them. And in Germany, you had Rudolf Rocker, who was kind of a very important theorist of anarcho-syndicalism. He's considered probably the forefather of it, though there are earlier thinkers that you could point to. In any case, so you have Rudolf Rocker, who was part of an organization called the FAUD. The FAUD was an organization that had developed from another organization, the FVDG, which was this working class revolutionary union that had been part of the council movement in Germany, the workers' council movement, workers' control movement. And so Rocker and a few other like-minded organizations and people who rejected the Bolsheviks and wanted to create their own revolutionary syndicalist international ended up forming in the early 1920s the International Working Men's Association. And that organization is actually still around today. I talked a little bit about this in my last video. Today it's called the International Workers Association. And the International Workers Association weathered a lot of storms. It weathered kind of the rise of state socialism. It weathered the Second World War. There was even a case where after the Second World War in Sweden, one of the the old theorists of an early revolutionary syndicalist organization that had existed in Sweden called SAC, S-A-C, had come to the conclusion that the anarchist idea of abolishing the state was kind of, could be dispensed with. And so as a result, the SAC ended up, getting positions in the state to oversee essentially state welfare programs. And the IWA, so that, the SAC, one of the old revolutionary syndicalist organizations, is becoming rather reformist, and the IWA is still kind of weathering this period. The other thing that the IWA weathered was the end of the Spanish Revolution. And the Spanish Revolution was probably the biggest event in history for the anarcho-syndicalist movement. On a rather large scale, the anarcho-syndicalist movement in France was able to put anarcho-syndicalist ideas into practice in an imperfect way, but on a large scale, no less. We'll go back a little bit, though, to discuss the emergence of the anarcho-syndicalist movement in Spain. The CNT, the National Confederation of Labor, in Spain, formed out of the kind of anarchist-influenced labor movement in the country. And the CNT was one of the first organizations to kind of synthesize anarcho-syndicalism out of anarcho-communism and revolutionary syndicalism. So the CNT kind of forms, and over time it builds itself until leading up to the Spanish Revolution, they have millions of members. So they have a very, very large mass movement. And then around the time that the CNT is developing, you also have the development of kind of progenitors of anarcho-syndicalism, organizations that would kind of synthesize the ideas of anarcho-syndicalism with the FORA in Argentina, FORA, and the FORU, so FORU in Uruguay. The FORA was very influenced by the CGT that we had discussed earlier. And so with the CNT, the FORA, the FORU, you have the synthesizing of this idea of revolutionary syndicalism, organizing labor unions for militant class struggle and workers taking control of society, with kind of anarchist politics, the ideas of libertarian socialism, of a non-hierarchical anti-state socialism. So with those organizations, you have the development of anarcho-syndicalist thought. So now if we fast forward a little bit and then get to the Spanish Revolution that I alluded to earlier. So this is again, probably the biggest event for anarcho-syndicalism, the anarcho-syndicalist movement in history. What happens is there's an attempted fascist coup, and the CNT, along with masses of workers, essentially rebel against it, thwart the fascist coup, and then you have these working class uprisings in urban areas where workers are taking control of the cities, and the CNT becomes a vehicle for them to do this. And this kind of sparks off a general, what anarchists call social revolution, where you have the workers and the peasants rising up to take control of society and start transforming society. So in conjunction with the working class taking power in the cities, you also have the development of peasant collectives, where the peasants collectively controlled land and agricultural production. Now, early on, and this happens in the summer in July, early on in Catalonia, you have a dilemma being presented to the anarcho-syndicalists, to the Catalan CNT. The Catalan organization of the Republican government reaches out to the CNT with a proposal to make common cause with the CNT against the fascists. So at this point, the social revolution is kind of morphing into a civil war, where you have different political factions fighting for control over the country. So the Catalan CNT discusses this matter. Some of the Catalan CNT militants take the position that the CNT should just focus on organizing the social revolution, carrying out the social revolution further, and should essentially just ignore the Republic. Then you have others who take the position that the CNT should accept the Republic's offer because they're very alarmed about the threat of the fascists. They essentially thought that there was no way that they were going to be able to beat the fascists on their own. Related to this, at Zaragoza, the CNT had a congress where they adopted a program of libertarian communism, and this was essentially kind of an official kind of program for a kind of anarchist social revolution, where kind of the idea of anarcho-syndicalism, of the workers taking control of society and organizing things on the basis of workers' control and rank and file democracy, those kind of ideas were enshrined in the Zaragoza libertarian communism resolution. So the issue was whether to just continue to pursue the program of libertarian communism or to put it on hold and to join this anti-fascist alliance with the Republic. So the leaders of the Catalan CNT debated this very fervently, but ultimately the anxiety that they weren't going to be able to defeat the fascists alone prevailed, and they joined up with the Republic in an anti-fascist alliance. And this was to prove to be the undoing of the revolution, because the Republic was aiming to establish a kind of bourgeois nation state, right? A kind of typical national government. And that was directly at odds with the social revolution that had unfolded at the start of the Civil War, where the workers were starting to take control of society and run things themselves. And with the alliance between the CNT and the Republic came this kind of warped relationship that the CNT had to the Republic, where the CNT kind of became this arm of the Republican government. You had the development over time of what are today, or what have been called kind of sardonically anarchist ministers. So these people were CNT militants and anarcho-syndicalists, but they were also government ministers. And the CNT kind of developed this kind of statist bureaucracy that would ultimately side with the Republic's penchant for impeding the revolution rather than carrying it out further. One of the kind of key ways the Republic would undermine the revolution is that it would insist on the establishment of a kind of regular national army instead of a kind of volunteer worker militia kind of setup. The Republic also nationalized a lot of production for foreign capitalists, essentially making sure that that production wouldn't be taken under the control of the workers. And because of the Republic's kind of meddling in the affairs of the social revolution, in the cities, you had kind of this structure of worker-controlled enterprises that ultimately still had to operate within the market and couldn't develop a federal organization with the agricultural collectives to generalize workers' control over the whole system of production and the economy. So the Republic and the CNT government pass measures like the family wage, where you have kind of the mandating of a wage that a worker and his whole family can be supported on. But these are kind of reformist measures that are not really suited to a climate of social revolution. The kind of whole idea of anarcho-syndicalism is to abolish wage labor, and so it's not really a family wage isn't really a very revolutionary policy at a time where the working class had just risen up and defeated the fascists. And the Republic continues to play this reformist role. It essentially upholds kind of the nationalized production against workers taking control of production. They did this with phone lines, and there was a big uprising of CNT militants for the workers' control of the phone lines, and the Republic, with the help of the CNT bureaucracy, had to quell it. And they also had to quell a kind of revolt of a peasant fruit collective. So everywhere, basically, the Republic is trying to undermine the gains of the social revolution. And the effect that this has, my ACED friend told me to finish talking instead of answering questions, but someone asked a question, and this is interactive, so I'll get back to what I was saying and answer this question, or this comment, I guess. Posties are anti-socialist and insurrectionaries are against class-based struggle. There be two examples of non-socialist anarchism. So posties just reject traditional anarchism, so that's not a good example of non-socialist anarchism. To posties, anarchism just means essentially kind of individual autonomy, and that's not what I mean by anarchism. So, and insurrectionaries are against class-based struggle. What the hell are you talking about? I don't think anybody involved in the insurrectionist movements in Europe would agree with that. I think you're just talking out of your ass there. Anyway, so getting back to what I was saying. Sorry, Lucian. Anyway, so could you discuss the difference between freedom and autonomy? That's not directly related, I guess, but I'll address it. Freedom and autonomy, I guess, to me are more or less synonyms. I just think the question is freedom and autonomy for who. I think freedom and autonomy are only meaningful in a context where you have a free society. I don't think there's some as I was saying before, the post-left people think that you can have this iconoclastic individual autonomy, and I think that's just a delusion. Anyway, so getting back to what I was saying. So the Republic is basically undermining the Spanish Revolution at every turn, and the CNT is developing this kind of ossified bureaucracy that is just going along with whatever the Republic wants. The Republic, incidentally, is backed by the Soviet Union. And one of the big death knells of the revolution dealt by the Republic was done by a kind of a military officer of the Communist Party of Spain, which was just basically the Stalinized party. And basically this communist military officer led an attack on the Aragon agricultural collectives and basically just smashed them, got rid of them, gutted them. And so all while this is happening, you have different anarcho-syndicalist militants calling out the CNT for its part in the kind of bureaucratic reformist turn. There are even some militants who advocate kind of open rebellion against the CNT and the bureaucracy. So one of the people who is reported to be one of these anarcho-syndicalists who rejects the kind of who rebels against the reformist bureaucracy of the CNT is reportedly Benaventura Durruti. He was a very important leader in the Spanish Revolution. And I say reported because, a lot of the time, it's said that Durruti said this or that about it, but it doesn't seem to necessarily be verified. Anyway, and he unfortunately ends up getting killed in the course of the revolution. So basically things just get worse and worse from this point. There's more and more kind of reformist control exercised by the Republic. It's de-escalating the revolution. It's demobilizing the working class. The IWA, which the CNT was a part of at this time, actually took issue with the way things were going, and the CNT kind of just brushes that off. Okay, they oppose the distinction between collective and individual struggle. Who's they? Sorry, excuse me for the burp. Who's they? Posties, insurrectionists? Who are you talking about? I like that someone came on to this video to argue about argue against anarcho-syndicalism from a post-left perspective. That's very funny. Anyway, so getting back to what I was saying, so things just get worse and worse. The IWA tries to reason with the CNT about what's happening. The CNT just kind of brushes it off. And then ultimately, the fascists take their victory. The fascists win. Franco comes to power. Franco crushes the anarcho-syndicalist movement. And it seems that the kind of alliance, the anti-fascist alliance, was made all for naught. Now, there are important things related to anarcho-syndicalist theory about the fact, wait until the trots come to argue. Yeah, that'd be funny. Anyway, so where was I? Oh yeah, okay. So the yeah, okay. So there's two important things when it comes to is Orwell's account of the Civil War accurate? It's his his eyewitness account, so it's probably going to be less accurate than an actual scholarly study of the events. But eyewitness accounts are some of the materials that scholars use to study historical events. So, I mean, it's not. I wouldn't say it's worthless or particularly inaccurate necessarily. Anyway, so there's two important things with regard to anarcho-syndicalist theory that need to be addressed when it comes to the decision to join the Republic. The decision was made, number one, on this idea that they couldn't continue with the revolutionary program of libertarian communism because they couldn't defeat the fascists on their own. They had to put the program of libertarian communism on hold and just kind of make the temporary alliance with the Republic and defeat the fascists, and then they could talk about the revolutionary program. Now, this kind of anxious analysis of the situation was actually too anxious. The revolution, the anarcho-syndicalist movement had taken control of the major economic zones of Spain at that time, so it was totally possible that they could have worked from there to generalize the revolutionary movement, implement the program of libertarian communism, and use that kind of strategic control as a kind of launching pad against the fascists. So the anxiety that the Catalan CNT leaders had was overall kind of misplaced. It's an understandable form of anxiety if you're in the middle of the civil war with fascists, but it was overall misplaced. And then the other important aspect of this when it comes to anarcho-syndicalist theory is that the people that made this decision was not the rank and file. So remember, the anarcho-syndicalist concept of kind of revolutionary labor unions is that the rank and file are the ones who make the decisions. You didn't have that with the Catalan CNT's decision to join the Republic. Instead, the leaders, the prominent anarcho-syndicalists, just kind of had this debate among each other and then decided to join the Republic. So there was a fundamental lack of the anarcho-syndicalist principle of rank and file control in making the decision to join the Republic. And so that's an important lesson to take from the Spanish Revolution, that that it's important to be vigilant that the principles of anarcho-syndicalist movements are being adhered to, and we don't just kind of brush those aside in a moment of anxiety. So the ultimate effect of the Republic, or I shouldn't say end because this isn't part of what I was just saying, but anyway, so with those two things noted, the ultimate effect of the Republic's kind of preference for a reformist, or the Republic's preference for a traditional nation state rather than the social revolution that had rose up against the fascists, was that the working class became demoralized and immobilized. So the working class had risen up against the fascists and begun to carry out the social revolution, and then the Republic comes in and de-escalates the social revolution, pushes it back, and so that ultimately has the effect that the workers who are rising up against the fascists are being kind of pushed out of that fight. And so they're demoralized, they're immobilized, and essentially the Republic cripples the struggle against the fascists, and the fascists win. And in the aftermath of this, in the aftermath of the fascists winning and the Civil War ending, there's this Congress of the CNT, underground in exile, and At that Congress, it's pretty much unanimously agreed, or I don't know if I should say unanimously, but it's generally agreed that the decision to join the Republic was a giant mistake. And even an anarcho-syndicalist militant named Diego Abad de Santillan, who was one of the original proponents of joining the Republic, this kind of constant reformist voice. Even he kind of admits that it was just a giant blunder. And so that kind of closes that kind of all-important chapter of anarcho-syndicalist history. And so now I'm going to move from anarcho-syndicalist history to a more general history of left movements to kind of show what their results imply about anarcho-syndicalist theory for today's world. So when all this, throughout the night, so in the 20th century, when the IWA started and when the Spanish Revolution happens, there is this kind of huge success of leftist movements taking state power all across the world. And you have the creation of the socialist bloc of quote-unquote socialist states, the Soviet Union, etc. And you have new independent nation states develop, and kind of formal colonialism crumbles. And so you have these leftist, socialist, revolutionary movements in power in states across the world. Now, anarcho-syndicalism, being part of the anarchist tradition, had rejected this strategy of taking state power and using the power of the state to transform society. But that strategic choice didn't end up being the one that got generally accepted, because those that believed in taking state power could just appeal to the importance of the state as a political mechanism of the capitalist world system, right? So the general strategy that ends up being accepted is the strategy of taking state power. And so that's what happens. You have the creation of the Soviet Union, everything I just said, yada, 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 right? The creation of the People's Republic of China, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so now that the revolutionaries have taken state power, they now have to do the things which will allow them to keep state power. Now, the state, or a nation state, let's say, to exist within the modern world, needs to do two things. One, it needs to get recognized by all of the other states of the system, and that means being kind of integrated into this global political hierarchy of states. Some states have more power, some states have less power, etc. And this recognition by the other states of the world is what gives a nation state its sovereignty. Its right to be a nation state. So it needs to do that. And the second thing it needs to do is it needs to directly participate in the global division of labor that is the world market, and that ultimately is the capitalist world economy. So the revolutionaries who have state power, they do this in order to keep state power. The Soviet Union gets reconciles with the West after the Russian Civil War and after World War II, and then there's the Cold War, and that's a whole nother issue. But the Soviet Union is at least kind of resigned to or allowed to exist by the West, and there are trade deals and so forth. The West recognizes the People's Republic of China. The United States holds out on recognizing the People's Republic of China as against the Taiwanese Kuomintang, but eventually the U.S. gives in and recognizes the People's Republic of China. And there's this Wilsonian doctrine that the United States imposes on the rest of the world that gives nations the right of self-determination, quote unquote. And this is a phrase also used by Lenin. And so these new nation states are now recognized, where before they were colonies of Western powers. And then they take part directly in the world market and the capitalist world economy. They do economic buildup. They constrain the class struggle, so they consolidate themselves as regimes and put an end to the class struggle that brought them to power. They repress their opposition. They join they take part and they more officially join the world market. The socialist bloc did that in the 70s. All the way up to Khrushchev, you have Khrushchev talking about economically defeating the West and the United States. And so as a result of this, the revolutionaries become integrated into the state structures of the world system, and thus become integrated into the capitalist world economy. They become part of the system that they were aiming to transform. And the result of that is that they create state structures which are dependent on that system. And then in the 70s, when that system enters into a crisis of overproduction, those state structures collapse. And so you have the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and the remaining socialist states, quote unquote, have to adapt to this new atmosphere. The state structures of the third world, these new nation states, they start, kind of crumbling in inefficiency. And thus you have this kind of giant loss of faith in the state structures by the populations of the world, because the state structures just become these crumbling, hapless institutions in the middle of a world crisis of the whole world system. And so what that experience says is that the idea of taking state power to transform society is one that was based on faulty assumptions. The anarcho-syndicalists, being part of the anarchist tradition, had always insisted that the state was an elitist institution, that was prone to preserving the status quo rather than changing things. And the experience of the revolutionaries, the communists, the socialists, the nationalists who took state power in the 20th century shows that, in effect, they were right. And so this giant crisis of the capitalist world economy since the 70s, and thus the crisis of its state structures kind of gives a new life to the anarcho-syndicalist theory. It gives it gives new support to the ideas behind anarcho-syndicalism. That there should be this libertarian workers movement based on the control of the rank and file that organizes against state power instead of trying to take it. And so, I think that's where I'll end things. It's been about an hour. Thank you to Lucian from ACED for helping me with this. Thank you to everyone who watched and asked questions, even to that post-left guy who tried arguing with me, though I don't know where he went. Anyway, thanks to everyone who watched. I hope everyone got something out of it and enjoyed it. I'll see you guys later.